Julia. Hi, everyone, and we're delighted here today to have with us David Weber, who's joining us from Boston. And the idea of having David with us today was really to give us an appetizer for the bigger conference that he'll be co-chairing next month, the G7 Pensions Global Financial Forum. And David will be sharing more specifically the Workers' Capitalism session. And we wanted to have him today in this smaller format with us today to give us a teaser or appetizer on his next presentation, and also to give us, as we say in French, a freshly minted, it's really history in the making. So to give us his first preliminary assessment of what a President-elect Biden administration could mean in the coming quarters for fiduciary capitalism and labor capitalism and the progressive side of pension investment in the US, knowing that things are not very clear yet because, of course, the new administration hasn't been formed. And of course, President-elect Biden will take into account the desiderata of the Senate, blah, blah, blah. But, it's interesting to have David's enlightening lights on the issue as history gets made in real time. So, David, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Nick, as always, for having me. And as I said to you in the last one of these conferences, I feel like my role in the last few years in your conferences has been when we cut over it and now to America for some depressing updates about the status of ESG. So it's nice actually to have the opportunity now to report on some more, very likely much more positive developments when it comes to ESG, or in particular the US federal government's attitude towards ESG investing. I think it is a thoroughly accurate and thoroughly nonpartisan claim to make, to say that the Trump administration was about as hostile to ESG investing and the exercise of worker shareholder capitalism as is almost possible. And we saw this in particular over the last 3 or 4 months with guidance that was coming out of the US Department of Labor, all of which was designed to shackle, at a minimum shackle, if not really kind of attempt to kill off almost ESG investing itself. First, in the early part of the summer, we saw new guidance that very sharply challenged ESG investing, not just in terms of the language, but actually what we saw out of the Department of Labor were a number of investigations that were launched in which documents were requested looking into procedures by which investors and certain managers were making ESG investing choices. A little bit of a witch hunt, which in and of itself, even if it finds nothing, as witch hunts tend to do, are costly procedurally or are costly in other ways. And essentially the accusation is that this ESG is just purely the politicization of investment, where folks are pursuing political goals using the tool of investment and not pursuing the interests of the beneficiaries. And this is needless to say, there is at this point so much evidence in favor of the idea that ESG investing is good investing, is smart investing, smart long-term investing, that I don't think I'll spend much time on that. But in any event, this was one step that came out of the Department of Labor, and the second one came just towards the end of the summer, right around Labor Day, perhaps ironically, with a new proposed regulation that would effectively make it impossible for worker pension funds to vote in annual shareholder elections. This would have imposed a costly cost-benefit analysis, casting a very skeptical eye on the idea that it could ever be beneficial to a fund to actually vote in annual corporate and annual shareholder elections, something that has been a bedrock principle of American shareholding, American corporate law, American capitalism for a very long time. So that's where things stood under Secretary Eugene Scalia of the U.S. Department of Labor. Are you looking to interject here, Nick, or no?
No,
Okay.
no. Actually, as I agree with everything you said, actually, and not interject, but maybe a slight nuance, to use a French word. It's all the more mind-boggling that part of President Trump's base was actually fairly favorable to ESG. So this administration, the outgoing administration, didn't care about antagonizing part of their own base, including some centrist Catholic Episcopalian activists who backed President Trump, and they felt betrayed by what happened very abruptly in the dark in July and August 2020. And another thing, many of the younger sort of capitalist Republicans, they also like ESG from a purely capitalistic money-making standpoint. And so it was all the more shocking to see the outgoing administration almost, catering to the needs of, 19th century Texan, oil tycoon. So it didn't make any sense. Even the Wall Street Journal editorial board was surprised, which is a lot.
Yeah, it's a strange move. In some ways, I mean, this is pure speculation at this point, but you're right. I mean, I think it may be attributable as much to the disorganization of the Trump administration as it is attributable to any particular ideological stance or other objective. It was a strange move in many ways. It was an extreme move. It was a strange move. And you're right that some of the folks who so for example, there are parts of labor, let's say building trades unions, construction workers and such, who would have been who are badly harmed by this kind of thing, which, for example, would have really attempted to put a dampener on the ability to invest in ways like in infrastructure, in ways that lead to good jobs with high wages and strong benefits and contribute to pension funds, and that would have this kind of guidance could undermine something like that. And you're right, some of those folks were probably also themselves Trump voters. So it was done very late. It was done very quickly. One almost gets the sense that this second regulation about the proxy voting was really done by an administration that was thinking it was on its way out and trying to squeeze in something at the last second before it was too late. One detail that may be boring to most people, but to law professors like me is interesting, which is a very foreshortened comment period of just 30 days was given for that regulation, when ordinarily those are longer, 90 days. And that seemed almost exclusively devoted to the election calendar and the sense of the clock ticking before the administration was to leave office. So there was many aspects, you're quite right, that the politics of this seems kind of bizarre and sloppy in many ways. I mean, I certainly strongly favor the idea of investing in ways that are beneficial to workers in terms of creating jobs and so forth. In any event, I think that's right. It was strange, but it's what happened. And I think to ultimately get to answering your question, this is something that I think we can expect to see a change in direction on with the Biden administration. I think we can expect to see attempts by a Biden U.S. Department of Labor to walk back and undo some of these last minute interpretive and regulatory changes that were just put in over the summer. It's going to take a little bit of maneuvering in order to do that in the right way. And as you know, we still have 2 Senate seats that are up in the end of the year that could flip control of the Senate to the Democrats or maintain it in the hands of the Republicans. I think if it shifts in the direction of the Democrats, and we won't know until the end of the year, we might see some serious legislative action on this front. There are a lot of proposals out there on the Democratic side. And this is also one that some Republicans, for the reasons actually we were just describing, may themselves sign on to. In particular parts of the country where this idea of investing to create jobs for local workers and local economies is more embraced. So that's the last variable. I think we will see action out of the U.S. Department of Labor to undo some of the negative effects of this hostile attack on ESG. By the way, I should quickly note, I know we're running out of time, even the Trump administration actually walked back some of its own ESG guidance in the final form. It even took out references to ESG in particular, and just was sort of sounding the point about, well, investing shouldn't be done for politics, but for returns and for participant benefits. And I don't think anybody really disagrees with that. So there's been already a little bit of walking back. I would expect Biden would take things in a different direction. And if the legislature changes hands, there may even be legislative reform as well.
Hopefully, and I'm saying this as a centrist, as you know, so I'm saying hopefully because it's really sad. It breaks your heart, all the missed opportunities we've had, in America in the past 20 years regarding, ESG, climate finance, and infrastructure. It really breaks your heart to see, all these airports and bridges crumbling. And I think, 4 years ago, ironically, Trump himself tapped into that anger and frustration, which came from the left and the center about, infrastructure crumbling, etc. But once in office, he did nothing about it.
That's right.
So hopefully the next administration will do something about it.
There had been some talk about it, and Trump seeing himself, whether, as a builder and so forth, that maybe he really would be interested in working with the Democrats on infrastructure. The Democrats in the Senate adopted a plan. You're right, it never went anywhere. You're right on infrastructure. We have woefully inadequate infrastructure in the United States, enormous need that would create millions of jobs, would create good return on investment. And it's really a shame that it hasn't happened. One can only hope that its chances will be increased under a Biden administration. We shall see. We shall see.
And you've got, infra, ESG, workers' capital. It's almost a match made in heaven. So it's really, so hopefully it will finally happen in the coming quarters.
Well, look, I mean, final thought is just, if there's going to be large infrastructure spending in the United States, it is highly unlikely that it would come in the form of one big massive check from the US government. Hopefully there would be some funding from the US government, but it's also very likely to come in the form of tax breaks, tax favored investment treatment for infrastructure investments, which means mobilization of private capital, which means ideally pension capital. And if pensions can get in on this and make these kinds of investments, it's good for them, not just on the return front, but in terms of creating more jobs with new contributors, the virtuous circle story that we like to tell. I think it's still possible. But then again, you're right. We've been saying this for 20 years. So
on that cautious note of optimism, I want to thank you for having joined us. Today, as you know, the European Asian webinar is a small, mid-size event. So we're announcing the big one next month. And we're also, some of us today are joining us via audio only. And so I want to say that, with your permission, we will slice and dice that particular segment and to be released on YouTube, hopefully next week.
No problem. That's fine.
Great. À bientôt. À bientôt. Cheers.
Great to see you as always. Thanks a lot. I'll talk to you.